Hello, my name is Richard Tromans, and this is another episode of Artificial Lawyer TV. Today we're talking to Nick Thomson, who is the General Manager of iManage RAVN. Today we're going to be talking about what I hope you'll find to be an interesting subject, which is why is a DMS like a record shop? Now, what do you mean by this? How is a DMS like a record shop?
I mean, the quite simple fact of the matter is that obviously the document management system holds so much rich information. And when I was joined Raven and working with the iManage team, it's the sort of thing that stood out to me was just the vast richness of material that's being created every day inside firms that are then saving that information into the DMS. um, and quite like a record store, which is full of very rich material with albums full of music and made by amazing artists. That whole treasure trove of information is just there to be used by people and to help people discover new music. And just with that same analogy holds with the DMS, because you have all this material that's produced by the fee earners and it's being stored inside the document management system. So much intelligence about what's going on in the market, so much intelligence about negotiating positions and how trends are changing. Information and material that would just vastly improve others within the firm's practice if they were able to unlock that knowledge and get access to it. And so it's just, to me, it's kind of obvious, when information gets lost in amongst folders of all that volume, you can just lose it amongst the noise. And it's if you walk into a record store and you don't know which album, which artist to go and find, it can be sort of bamboozling to try and go through all the different sections of the record store to find that information. So same thing goes with the DMS that's full of 50 million files. Like, how do you find the really important stuff, the real insight and the real material? And how can we help the world of knowledge management is very similar to how Spotify transformed the whole music industry and helping people discover new music without having to have that vast knowledge about which corner of the store it's stored in and which album was the best album to buy. And because ultimately, at the end of the day, lawyers are looking for their equivalent of songs, which is the best practice and the intelligence that will help them. The NLP is, of course, one way to be able to get into the documentation to understand what's inside the documents. But even if I take a sort of analogy that's maybe been used historically around about search, where if you're going to a website and it says people who looked at this also looked at this information, so people who looked at goggles also looked at flippers. That whilst you could say this, try and take that same analogy and apply it to the DMS. Well, a user who looked at this document also looked at this document. That's not as insightful in the world where not every user, users from different practices may be looking at the same document type, but for different reasons. Um, and that's where we use machine learning. So we use machine learning actually as one area is to build profiles of user behavior based on the audit history and what they do inside the document management system. So not just which files have they viewed, but which files have they copied and reused from other areas, and how does that profile then match with another user. So actually what we're doing is using machine learning to build social profiles of the users based on um, their behaviors inside the document management system to then recommend content to them based on their usage and of the DMS. So that's just one way where you can start to better match people together and work out peers and create peer circles and then suggest content that's being used by somebody like you that you may be also interested in. Things like being able to look at the document copies, that also helps you start to gain an understanding of which information is being reused in the DMS that people have found useful, that you should then be thinking about curating that into a library. So lots of what you described with that music analogy, with the curation of the album cover and the song lists, and then obviously people then rating and reviewing. Some of that's already just naturally happening in the day-to-day activities of the firm. When you then start to overlay things like NLP and extraction techniques, that's when you can get even another layer of fidelity to the insight that you can capture, because you can start to work out the value of the documents that someone's looking at or the parties and the agreements. So it all starts at classification, but then goes very quickly down into much more detailed levels.
Well, let's just dig into that. So let's say, for example, a lawyer was, constructing a document, and they had a vague recollection that there was a very, very particular way of wording a clause which they needed for this particular type of document.
Mhm.
Couldn't remember where it is. Got no idea. It's taken all day to go through manually. Can they drag up the clause that they're thinking of
Mhm.
by just putting in enough sort of semantic information, not just keywords, but various sentences, or
Mhm.
writing a couple of phrases that are approximately what they're looking for, and then
Mhm.
they'll be taken to the entire clause, which is nested inside some document somewhere.
Yeah. So again, you've got a couple of choices about how that works. I mean, much of that problem you described in there is still a search-based problem. But if you have the right structured content sitting behind it, you can achieve the outcome. So one of the things we do is help firms curate their clauses using NLP, so that, I mean, ultimately what you don't want to do is link. When everyone asks for about clause banks, you need the fidelity to be able to say this is the they still need the drafting notes that go with the clause. This is an example of good practice, bad practice. When should you use that particular clause? But we absolutely can associate the clause with the document it came from, so that you can always see that context. So you find that clause, you can then highlight where that clause has then been found inside the agreement, so that then you can um, uh, see exactly how it was drafted in. So it's not just about having the clause available; it's also about having the context from which it came. So ultimately, when you really go down to it, the valuable thing you want when you're searching for a clause is, well, I want it for the outcome. A clause that was drafted that had the outcome for the matter that we wanted, or for a matter of a similar size
Could you
or jurisdiction.
could you search by outcome?
Yes, yeah, again, absolutely. So that's partly again the value of the knowledge index that we create. So we don't just apply. What our goal with really the Raven technology is to make sure that we build the index into the DMS, and that sort of gives us what you would call a relatively traditional index, which you can do your keyword searching and retrieval on. Using our NLP capabilities, then enrich that index for the important documents. You wouldn't do it for everything in those documents. You would do it for the really important ones. And again, that's all we can help with that identification. But then you want to enrich it with the best of what doesn't exist inside the DMS, because it's not just about the document context. It's about what can you get from the billing system, what can you get from West KM if you want to enrich with litigation information, what can you get from practical law, so you can start to see precedent information. And it's making sure you pull that all into the same index, not federating it in so it's really difficult to see and to compare across the data types, is that get it all into the same index, three-dimensionally related. So now you can move between client to matter to document to author to behavior inside the DMS. These things are all linked, and so having them all linked together then lets us do another layer of analysis on top to start to work out peers and trends and make that information available to the firm.